podcast listeners. This is Ed Franklin with the Ed Franklin No Limits podcast. You can always get a hold of me at edfranklin.nolimits@gmail.com. We're closing in on that 100th episode that I've been talking about that I'm going to do live, and I'll absolutely advertise that when it's time. And I hope you can join me live and get some live feedback. And today we have another guest on. This gentleman's name is Tim Rohrer. I met Tim a few years back, and he was kind of, I guess, mentoring me in some way. And we're going to talk a lot about mentorship today because Tim wrote a book called Sales Lessons of the World's Greatest Mentor. Tim, thanks for being on my podcast. I really appreciate it.
Great to be here, Ed. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. So Tim and I are probably about as opposite as you can get personality-wise. He's a lot more thoughtful than me, kind of more laid back, and I'm out there kind of, doing it. But we always have good conversations when we get together. We try to get together every few months and have some lunch and kind of talk. And Tim's always got some good feedback. So this book is awesome. I read the whole book.
Thank you.
You take a very different approach than most people with sales books, because when you told me you're writing a book, I'm like, that's what we need is another sales book. Everybody's got an opinion on how to sell, but the difference in yours, and I'm not just saying this because you're here, is you give examples of how you learned these lessons. You talk about a specific person mostly that kind of helped, that kind of led you down this path. And so welcome to the podcast. Let's talk about this book. So
thank you.
What got you to even think about writing this?
So quite a while ago, I was writing a blog. It was called The Sales Loudmouth. And just every week or every other week, I would write down my thoughts about sales and selling. And I realized that after I wrote about 150 of these blog posts, I didn't have anything left to say. So I just stopped. You know how a lot of times, if you read sales columns or read sales books, people keep saying the same things over and over again. And I mean, I get that because there's kind of a new audience that keeps coming in, and they need to know the basic lessons, and they need to know, prospecting and qualifying and presenting and all that. But I just got bored, and I didn't have anything left to say. So I just stopped. And for a long time, I just had those columns on a thumb drive, just sitting here on my desk.
Right.
And then one day I decided I'm going to write a book, but I'm going to write a storytelling book because I think people learn better when there's a story. People are more engaged, they're more interested, they hang in there, right? And so I thought, okay, well, let me look through my old blog posts. I didn't have all 150. I only had like a dozen of them. And I thought, what could I do that would tie it all together? And I came up with the idea of connecting it all to the lessons that I was taught by my mentor, Dick Harlow. And so what you end up with is a book it's factual, but there's some historical fiction in there too. It's like I had to rearrange some of the settings, and I had to throw in some additional insights that I may not have learned right at that exact moment. But for the most part, it's sort of a 3-year timeline of the lessons I learned in sales from a person who was brand new to sales. And there's so many people who get into sales and they have no idea what they're doing. And they're not as lucky as me. They don't end up with a person who really cares about their career and their progress and their success. And so I wanted to write a book about that. And I wanted to write a book saying thank you to my mentor, because I just don't think people do that. Like, when was the last time you go back 30 years to the beginning of your sales career, look the person up and say, I just want to say thanks because that was awesome. So that's what the book does.
Well, it's exactly what it does. So one of the pieces to my podcast is storytelling, right? We all have a story, and we all have two versions of our story as far as I'm concerned. You have this one, like, I've come on and told this great story about my life and how there was never anything wrong and everything was great to this point. And then I can go back and tell you the one where I grew up with an alcoholic father, and I could leave people in tears by the time I'm 18, right? Of all the bad stuff that happened. But I never looked at it like that. I just thought that was my life and that was the way it goes. And I think salespeople, sometimes they tell the wrong story when they're out there. They end up complaining to a customer instead of, telling them the good parts of the story to get so that person gets to know them a little bit, so there's a little more personal contact. And I was kidding with my wife. I said, Tim's one of these guys. When he some of the sentences in the book to me were funny because you really outlined. I remember when the guy lights the cigarette and the end of the tip of the cigarette turns red. I would never think of putting something like that in, but it's a good touch, and it kind of takes you
Yeah.
into that. It kind of helps fill in the storyline.
Yeah,
So
I was trying to draw people in, because I think the book is a good read, even if you're not into sales. And that's kind of what I was hoping for, is like a non-salesperson could read it and still enjoy it and understand the lessons, but really also connect to the story itself.
well, yeah, and you definitely, and I think the podcast is going to help that because all the people that listen to my podcast aren't in sales, but I would tell them that this is a good book, just about relationship building, just about how to speak to people, how to listen to people. You're a good listener. I know when we're out somewhere, I'm usually the one doing all the talking, and you do a good job at listening, and then you can formulate an opinion off of what I've said. So it all starts in college and in Domino's Pizza. That one kind of was funny to me because Kit worked at Domino's years ago, my wife, and that's kind of how it all started with her. But you got into the business side of things. So tell us a little bit about. I don't want to give the whole book away in the podcast, but I'm going to pick a few things out that struck me as interesting.
Yeah, sure. I started driving for Domino's Pizza in between years at college, as a summer job. And I just loved it. I just loved being around the place. And
Yeah.
I loved learning all the different aspects of the job. And so when I came home for Christmas break or for spring break, I was back at the store driving and making tips and getting to know how the whole business worked. And then I got really intrigued because they told me that if you were a store manager for a year, that made you eligible to become a franchisee.
Oh wow.
And Domino's Pizza was growing like crazy back in the early 80s.
Yep.
And I went, I was enjoying school okay, but it just never really spoke to me the way I thought it would. Maybe I went to the wrong school. I went to a really big school, UNC Chapel Hill, and maybe I should have been to a smaller school, but I'm not sure exactly. Who knows what was going on in my 20-year-old mind. But I decided to quit college after my sophomore year and go into the manager training program at Domino's Pizza, and rapidly rose through the ranks and became a store manager and then a store supervisor and then the director of operations for the franchise that I worked for.
Oh
And
wow.
I helped grow the business from 18 stores to 33 stores, doing $12 million a year in revenue.
Good Lord. Did you know? So I have some kids that work for In-N-Out Burger that have worked for them, and then I have one of my son-in-laws works for In-N-Out Burger, and this company is really a company that takes care of you. And
Yeah.
I never worked in fast food, but when I talk to him about the culture and ownership, and I used to actually sell products to In-N-Out Burger. It was a fantastic organization, still is a fantastic organization. This gal's growing it. She's a young girl too. She's like the granddaughter of the original people. And she's doing a good job. So yeah, so that was interesting. But you learned a lot about business. I mean, you were learning more there than you were in college, apparently,
That's for
right?
sure.
Yeah,
And you know what? I was learning the things I wanted to learn too, and that was really the key. I didn't like college so much the first couple years because it was all general curriculum courses. You have to
right,
take, 2 years of foreign language and 2 years of history, and you have to do this and that and pass a swimming test. And I was like, I don't want to do any of that. I want to learn about how to run a business. And at Domino's Pizza, they taught me how to do that, and they paid me money. So
nice.
it was great.
Well, when I got into sales, I remember I wanted to get back into sales. I was working for Pepsi, driving a truck, and I was running the service department, and I was going through a divorce. I said, "Yeah, I need more money. I got to pay child support and everything."
Right.
And the owner of, the general manager says, "Look, don't you'll be a horrible salesperson. Do not go into sales." And so I've been selling for like 35 years since then. And it just goes to show, people aren't always right about what you're going to do. Did
I'm
you
always
finish?
surprised. I'm always
Yeah, no,
surprised when people want to tell you what not to do
of
with their
course.
lives. It always kind of like you hear these stories about people who've made it big, and their advice to everybody else is don't listen to the naysayers. And I'm thinking, who are these people? But apparently there are people who are willing to say, you won't be good at this, or you can't do that. And I just,
Well, I can tell you, as I'm
oh,
going through this, trying to do more public speaking and things like that, I can read somebody when they just think, you shouldn't do this, and I just ignore it. Obviously, I don't. Is in a cuss there. I don't care anymore what people think. I'm too old to care, and I know they're not going to be right. So, um, it's funny. I'm reading another book right now that I'll get you. You need to read this book. So far, what I've read in it, you'll really like it. And the guy says at one point, there's no statues of critics anywhere in the world, right? Never a statue of a critic, always a statue of a person that's been successful.
yes.
So another something that jumped out in the book, and I should show the people the book, and I'm going to put it on. I am going to put it on a link to it when I do this podcast when I publish it.
Thank you.
The pen was interesting to me. The Mount Blanc pen, Mount
Yeah.
Blanc pen was interesting.
Mont Blanc, like the mountain. Yeah.
Yeah, presentation is everything, right?
Yes.
It's always that, when you show up to a call, what you're looking like when you show up to that call, and how well you're put together and things like that. And I was lucky. I've been able to wear a suit to work, and I've been able to wear construction, jeans and a construction vest and things like that. And depending on the atmosphere, if the dress is appropriate, nobody cares, right?
Right.
But it's the guys in suits that show up on construction sites and vice versa. The guys that show up in the jeans and dirty jeans that want to sell you, something when you're an executive.
Right.
But tell that story quickly. That was, I like that story.
Sure. Well, Dick came into a sales meeting one day and he was carrying a bag, and we didn't know what was in it. But Dick always ran our sales meetings, even though most general managers don't. Most general managers let the general sales manager run the sales meetings, but Dick loved
Right.
it, right? He was a sales manager at heart. And so he ran this one particular sales meeting where he had us sign our name using a Bic pen and then sign our name just below it using this Mont Blanc pen. And he made the point that the Bic pen was 100 times cheaper than the Mont Blanc, but you couldn't really distinguish the ink from each other, and the signature
Right.
was the same, and they both wrote fine. He says, but why is it that people are willing to pay $100 for this pen? It's funny now because that same pen is $600, by the way.
Jeez.
I should have hung on to mine.
Yeah.
But he said the reason why people are willing to pay more is because it's beautiful, right? It's the way it's presented. It comes in its own lacquer box with silk bedding. The instructions come in 7 languages, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. And it makes you feel good to hold it in your hands. And when you pull it out of your pocket to sign something, people notice it.
Yeah.
And his point was, look, it's not about the utility of something. It's about how you present it. And that was especially intriguing to us in radio because we sold a commodity. One commercial on one radio station was essentially the same as a commercial on another.
Right.
And so in order to sell more than the other guy, you had to distinguish between them. And Dick's point was, don't distinguish between the radio stations, distinguish between yourself and the other radio sellers. Present yourself, right? And you will find that that's where you have an edge. And I just thought the way he taught the lesson was just so brilliant, And then in the end, he gave all of us a Mont Blanc pen, which was the capper, right?
Sure.
That was the presentation. It was what's cool about it is like it's a story about the fact that presentation is everything, but he was demonstrating that presentation is everything while he was saying it. It was kind of sort of like the meta version of the sales meeting. It's like there's a lesson within the lesson, and it was just really, really cool, and it just stuck with me all these years.
So I brought this up when I was in construction sales. People they're always trying to nickel and dime you, right? Get that price down, get the goods. They're going back to that commodity thing. And I would bring up sometimes in sales meetings. I remember bringing up to a guy one time why he was wearing these certain glasses, and they were Oakley glasses. And I wear Oakley glasses. My prescription glasses are Oakley. They're like $150, and they're very comfortable and stylish, and they never go out of style. And they would say, well, you're a little bit too high. And I'd say, what kind of glasses are you wearing? Because you could get the same plastic glasses at Walmart for $10. They just say banana bread on them or something, right? But you'll spend $150 and wear these to a construction site because they're comfortable, they're stylish, and all those things. So I always, that's where I really learned to start selling value to somebody, right? Forget the price. Let's not talk about the price. Let's find out what you're buying first.
Yeah.
You know, if there was no such thing, if it was all about price, Ferrari, Porsche, Mercedes, it'd all be out of business, right? Because we know that a Hyundai will get you to the liquor store just as much as good as a Mercedes, but it's to make it how it makes you feel. It's always funny. I see these really rich guys. I saw this guy the other day, one of these guys from Shark Tank, Mr. Wonderful, and he walks by this Lamborghini and he says, "What a waste of money." Well, not to the person who bought that Lamborghini. That makes them feel good, and they had the money to buy it. Let them buy it. He spends money on stuff I'm sure I wouldn't spend money on,
Yep.
right? But that's just their thing, and that goes back to the critics. Who cares? You know, it's not your money. Don't worry about it. Let
Right.
those companies and those employees have jobs because people will buy those products. Something you mentioned in your book too about having music at sales meetings. I love that.
Yeah.
Kind of getting people, just kind of change their tune, right? Literally, when they
Yeah.
come into a meeting. Did you guys do that a lot? Is that where you learned that?
Yeah. Every meeting. So at the beginning of every meeting, there was always music playing. And it's really interesting what music does to people, right? If you ever notice in a movie, they'll be telling you the story. And then at some point in the movie, they have to, in a very short period of time, like 2 or 3 minutes,
Hmm.
tell a timeline that lasts for maybe months, right? So you're in this day-to-day story, but now months have to go by and you still have to stay connected to the story. And the way they do it is they play a song and then they show some scenes, but the music creates a mood and it changes your emotions. And Dick knew that if you're playing music as people walk into a conference room, no matter what baggage they brought in there with them, they set it aside because the music changes the way they feel. And if you pick the right songs, you can get people to feel a certain way, right?
Sure.
And so I found that to be super interesting. And I love the psychology of selling and playing music in advance of a sales meeting to get people to feel a certain way or to bring everybody together around a singular message is really very clever and it works.
Yeah, I mean, I listen to music a lot, especially when I'm driving. And those songs, and I listen to Sirius, so I might listen to 70s or 80s, serious music. And there's that song that just takes you back
Yes.
to that moment in life, right? Where you were dating a certain person or something was going on. And that happens a lot. And I even have my kids now or grandkids like singing that music when I'm driving.
Mhm.
Of course, it's going to take them back to me in the car, which
Right.
is okay, right?
That's fine. Right. That's their
But I have
memory.
a whole different memory, of what that music does for me. So you got into radio advertising. Wow, that's a big jump from pizza, right? To radio advertising. How the heck did that happen?
Well, what happened was the guys who owned the Domino's Pizza franchise that I worked for got into a fight and they ended up taking it into bankruptcy protection.
Oh
And
no.
so they split the assets up. And I knew I was a director of operations of a 33 store, $12 million a year operation. And it was going to become, separated. And so whatever my guy, my owner was Dan, whatever he ended up with, he wouldn't need a director of operations. He might need a store supervisor.
Yeah.
I was too young and brash and foolish to talk to him about it and try to figure out what's my role in the new entity. Instead, I quit to start my own business with the marketing director who also was getting laid off.
Right.
And we started this business that really had no chance of succeeding because we were way undercapitalized. But I didn't know that. I was in my 20s and it was my first try. And so we did that for about 18 months and I ran up huge credit card debts. And then we folded the business and I needed to find a job. And I did not want to go back into food service um,
The
because
food
I
business
felt,
is tough, man. It's a tough business.
well, I felt like I'd already done it.
Yeah.
And I explored a little bit. I talked to the people at PepsiCo. They owned at the time Taco Bell and Kentucky Fried Chicken and Pizza Hut.
Mhm.
Now that's called Yum Brands.
Used to be called Tricon. So,
Right.
right. So when I worked I used to sell a product after the guy told me I shouldn't sell, I should just shut up and do what I was doing. This
Right.
friend of mine, there was a supplier came in and said, "Hey, this guy's hiring." And I went over and got a sales job. Because about 2 weeks before that, I was complaining about my job. And someone says, "You know what? You can quit." it's okay. I mean, you can just quit and go do something else. And I'm like, oh shit, I can do that. So I went and got this sales job, and the guy says, well, this is what you have to do. I said, hold on, all I got to do is go talk to people, and if they buy my stuff up, you'll pay me extra. He's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, I don't want to do that. That sounds easier than hell.
Yes.
And it was easy to just for me to go out and sell. I could walk up to anybody in a grocery store if I needed to. But I had to go, I worked with Pepsi a lot, and we had to go survey bag in a box racks and pumps and all that stuff for Tricon. So it was all these, I was up in the Northwest doing all these things. So anyway, I mean, get off track there, but
Well, anyway, I did talk to them and they would have hired me, but they wanted me to go back and work in the stores, and I
right.
feel like, okay, I get that, but I've already done that and I didn't want to do it again. And so I decided I was going to try to find something different. And it took me a long time to find something. And eventually I read this book that says, here's how you get a job. You make a list of all the people you know, and you call them up and you tell them you need some help because you need to get a job. And this is something you and I talked about, right? Not too long
Sure.
ago. And I made that list and I called a guy named Phil Zachary, who was the general manager of a radio station in Raleigh that I had done business with when I had my own business. And he said, yeah, we're hiring in Charlotte. So I went up to Charlotte and I interviewed and I got the job and moved up to Charlotte and started my career in the radio advertising business in 1990.
Now, did you go to school? What college did Michael Jordan go to?
Yeah, he went to UNC Chapel Hill. He and I were there at the same time.
You were there at the same time. That had to be kind of interesting. We'll talk about that again at another lunch. But
Yeah.
I was enamored with him, and I was playing. I played a lot of basketball, so when he was coming through, they were doing the NCAA's and everything. I was just fascinated by him, and still am, and have been. And so that's pretty cool. So radio advertising, I'll tell you my experience with that. When I was at Allstate, we had a guy come in and talk to us from a radio station, and it was very interesting the things they were telling me. I'd never had any experience with that, and I was very interested in doing that. I thought radio advertising was great. I used to listen to KGB, the DSC show. I don't know if you know who they are, but Dave Rickards. My kids went to school with his kids, and I thought that would have been a great thing for Allstate to do, but they weren't interested in doing that advertising, and it wasn't that expensive actually, really, in the whole scheme of things,
Yeah.
for what they wanted to spend on other things. But something I wanted to talk about. So, is Dick Harlow still with us?
Yeah, he sure is. In fact, he's still
Okay,
in the
good.
video business. He is the chief operating officer of a small broadcast company in North Carolina, and they own radio stations in places like New Bern, North
Oh,
Carolina,
nice.
Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and a couple of other places. They've got about 20. So yeah, he and I spoke the other day. We're going to get together in June,
Oh, that's
and
great. Okay, good.
probably going to do some speaking engagements. So that's kind of cool.
So, an interesting thing towards the end of the book, when you finally leave the radio business, um, it seems like you guys just kind of said, "Hey, I got a new job," and you just kind of went whoop, and went, and like, so he went somewhere, and you went. It's like you never really capped off how your relationship ended at that time. Obviously, it's still going, but
Right. Right. Well, yeah, it was suspended for quite a while. We didn't talk to each
yeah.
other for, I don't know, 2 decades maybe.
Oh wow. So that was interesting to me because you never want that to happen with somebody, right? No matter good or bad. I mean, I talk to girlfriends from high school still, and yeah, when that happened, I'm like, oh no, I hope that's something. I hope it wasn't a bad thing at the end. I'm not giving away the book. It's not like a story that
No,
I can't
right.
tell you the ending to, but
Right.
that was just interesting how you guys ended up splitting, going different directions.
Well, it was interesting because at the time radio, well, and for a long time thereafter, radio was going through this consolidation where people were buying each other up and then
Yeah,
laying people off. And there was a lot of shuffling going on. And, you didn't want to be the person who was left without a seat when the music stopped. And so when our station was sold to another company, I got a phone call from some people down the street and they said, why don't you come work over here? We've got a sales manager position.
yeah,
We'd love to have you. And I thought it was a really great opportunity. So I took it. And for Dick, breaking up with me was not that big of a deal. I was a salesperson that had been on the staff for 3 years. But for me, breaking up with Dick was traumatic. It was horrible, right? Because
yeah.
he was my mentor. And I thought the world of him, and our relationship meant so much, but he didn't know any of that. And I mean, until recently, right? When I wrote a book about him and told him.
Sure.
So,
How did he
yeah,
feel about you writing the book about him? Was he kind of humbled by that, or?
when I first told him I was going to write this book, it was a number of years ago.
Yeah.
Obviously, I didn't write it at the time, but I contacted him and I said, I'm going to write this book and I'm going to call it The Sales Lessons of Dick Harlow. And he says, Oh, I wish you wouldn't do that. And I said, Why? And he said, I work for a company that, for whatever reason, they wouldn't think that that was cool. And
Yeah.
they would give me a hard time about it. And he says, I don't know, it just wouldn't be good for me. And I thought, well, you're working for the wrong company if a company would treat you that way. Right. So I
Well, he
came,
wasn't a flamboyant guy though, right? He was,
no,
so
no,
he probably felt like that was being flamboyant or something.
maybe a little show offy or something,
Yeah.
but I just thought he was working for the wrong company, because anybody who would not celebrate a person who had a book written about him, to me, that's crazy, right? That's foolish. But there are a lot of radio companies out there who are kind of that way and a little snobby, and they like to be controlling. And so he knew that his company was that way. And so I didn't
Yeah.
write the book. But then I did some other things. Like I went to college part time, and that took me 5 years to finally get my degree that I
I was
had.
going to ask you if you got your degree. Good for you.
Yeah, yeah, last year. I went to Boston and walked across the stage at Northeastern University, so I got a Bachelor of Science in Leadership.
Nice.
And I came back from that, and all of a sudden I had all this time on my hands because I was spending a lot of time doing schoolwork. And I thought, okay, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to become a world-class pickleball player and become nationally ranked in my age group. Right?
There you go. This is a big deal. This pickleball.
Pickleball, right? It's a big deal. So this was last year, and I went out to the club and joined up, with all the people playing pickleball on a Tuesday night. And in the very first game, I lunged forward to hit a ball and tore the fascia in the bottom of my left foot,
Right.
hobbled off the court, ended up in a boot, and the dream of becoming a national pickleball player had to be put on hold. So now I
On
have all this
hold. Good for
time.
you.
Right, it's still coming around. So now I had all this time on my hands, and I couldn't do anything like play pickleball or tennis or golf. So I said, okay, I'm going to write that book. And so I did. Right. So that was last year. It took me about 6 months to write it, then another month to edit it. And by this time, of course, Dick was no longer with that company. He was with this
Right.
small broadcast company, and he was the big shot, and nobody could tell him that somebody couldn't write a book about him. And so this time I told him I was writing the book, and he
I
was
mean,
okay.
on a really small scale, when I was running the chamber, the paper would come and talk to me a lot, or the news media would come. We had a situation in Poway where what was it? Oh, they had a water line break or something, and they had to shut restaurants down for a week. So they wanted to speak with me. So they call me. KUSI calls me. I go down to the city to talk to him. Got a clean shirt on. Did all kind of presented, and they interviewed me, and they put literally about a 4-second clip on TV about what I was talking about. Now I didn't want them to spend a half an hour on me,
Right.
but for all that time, I told Kit, I'll never do that again. If they call me, they can do it over the phone or something. I
Right.
was never wanting anybody to write anything about me if I was doing a good job, because I did a good job. It just is a part of my job, so I never wanted anybody. It's it's kind of odd. I'm very careful on my podcast when I talk about my children because I don't want to embarrass them. Because I
Yeah.
got some great stories, but everybody would know who I was talking about, and I don't want to put them in that situation. So I kind of hold back on that. So your foot problem comes back to another question I was going to ask you. So you were taking these golf lessons, and
Yes.
you got into a situation where you couldn't golf as good or whatever, but you were starting to mentor in a way the pro there, right? The young guy.
Yeah. Right. My instructor at Golf
Yeah.
Tech.
Kind of trying to help him on his sales process because, you know, especially people our age, when we think of salespeople, I think my mind goes right back to the 60s with the guy with the plaid jacket right at the car dealership.
Yeah.
He's trying to sell you a $200 car for $2,000, right? And that's where salespeople really got their bad name.
Yes, for sure.
And I remember in the chamber, people would say, well, I'm not a salesman. I own the company, but I'm not a salesman. I said, well, I got news for you. Everybody in the world is a salesperson. And I would say, and I don't want to make this make this insulting, but I'd say even Jesus had to sell what he was doing, right? He kind of had to get out there and give information on his product, if you want to call it that.
Sure.
And he kind of had to let you know. So this golf pro just couldn't get over that hump to get to that place he wanted to be. So he ends up working at Golf Tech, giving lessons, right? And
Right.
you mentioned something about a disappointment gap, and I thought that was interesting. Tell me about that little tidbit.
Yeah. So when you sell something that depends upon a result, you run the risk of the person who buys it expecting one result and the person who sells it knowing that there's going to be a different, lesser result. But the person selling it doesn't explain that. And as a consequence, the buyer is unhappy
Mm-hmm.
because they didn't get the results they expected. So, what I taught people in the radio business was to lower expectations because you can't really increase results, right? So, as much as you like to believe your radio station is fantastic, and if you write the best possible commercial, then you're going to achieve these remarkable results for this local advertiser. The fact of the matter is, you don't control that. But what you have some control over is what the person expects to happen. And so you downplay the results.
Mm-hmm.
And the bottom line, then when the results meet the expectation, no, the person's happy or satisfied, right? Not disappointed. So the disappointment gap is the difference between the expected results and the actual results. And that disappointment gap is what creates churn. It's the reason why people don't renew. So it's the reason why people don't renew radio advertising. And it's also the reason why people don't renew golf lessons.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I taught William was, look, you have to understand why it is that people are coming to take a golf lesson. And you have to talk to them about what it is they can expect realistically before they take a single lesson. Because then when they take the lessons and they do get the results that you told them they'd get, then they'll just keep taking more lessons because it's working. But if they come in and they say, I want to be able to shoot 75 on a regular basis, and you say, well, what do you shoot now? And they say 95,
Mm-hmm.
you need to say to them, that's probably not going to happen. Instead, what you guys say is, okay, well, in order to achieve the kind of results that you're expecting, you need to take, 52 lessons over the course of the next 52 weeks, and it's going to cost you $7,500. I said, but what you know in your heart is, even if they came into practice 3 times a week and they took all those 52 lessons, they're not going to improve their score by 20 strokes.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is, they don't need to improve their score by 20 strokes in order to be happy with their game. The key to selling golf lessons is making sure the student enjoys the game more than how they're currently enjoying it.
Right.
So you have to ask them questions about what would it mean to you if you were able to achieve some improvement in this aspect of the game or that aspect of the game. And they'll tell you things like, if I could just not be the shortest driver in my regular foursome, that would be great because I'm tired of the guys calling me shorty. It's very insulting. I
Right.
laugh along with them, but I really want to, smash a 3-iron over their heads. So if you could just do that for the guy, right?
Yeah.
Then that's enough because then they enjoy the game more. If you could say to him, what would it feel like to have to hit just one shot out of a sand bunker? Wow, that would be incredible. Every time I got into a sand bunker, I could be guaranteed I'm going to get out with a single swing. That would change my life. Okay, well you can do that for a student. That's something you can do, right?
Yeah.
And they're telling you that if you could just do that, they would enjoy the game so much more, and they would be willing to pay you money to have that skill, and that's a skill
Well,
you can teach.
and that's something I've talked to people about, and I'm gonna come back to something else and to kind of tell about how I met you. When you talk about a Michael Jordan or a Tiger Woods or anybody, Tom Brady, they become experts at doing the same thing the same way every time, right? That's really what their skill is to be able to focus in and concentrate and release that ball at the same time or hit, swing that club at the same way every time, and then they can make little adjustments. It's us hackers. Like, I'm a terrible golfer, but I just can't. First, I just can't get any of it figured out. I really need lessons if I want to continue to do it. But it's those kind of little things that you can definitely teach people. So marketing, you taught me something. When we met, you were working for Gil Cargal, and you were coming in. We had like a what do you call it? Like a executive group,
Right.
and we would discuss things on a regular basis and try to improve each other's business, learning through each other, right?
Yes.
And I told you something that the problem with I always saw with that is that people would go back to work and go right back to their same habits, right? They'd agree and they'd say, "Yeah, I could do that," and this, and then they go right back to their same habits. But you taught me something. You were at the whiteboard at Allstate one day, and you said marketing is about credibility and sales is about relationships, right? Marketing is the history of your company, what products you carry, how long you've been doing it, all those things that make people feel comfortable with you. And then when you sell it, you have those relationships. What I see in marketing, and I had a who I consider an expert a couple podcasts ago, is people will say, well, I'm going to spend, I have this much budget for 6 months, and then I expect all these things.
Right.
Of course, we know that marketing is a crapshoot a lot of times. It's a roll of the dice. You got to make sure your demographics are straight. You understand your demographics, you know. But you told a story in your book about a guy that was advertising and I think the gal in your office kind of broke down the numbers for you
Yes.
and said, if every customer brings two more customers in and then you extrapolate that information out 5 years or whatever,
Right.
this could be his result, right? I, I think that's a hard thing to explain to customers, and it's even worse if you don't understand the math, right?
Yes.
Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
If you can't explain, like I remember a guy telling me we had a storytelling marketing class I went to, and he was saying if you're a grocery store and you know that only people about 2 miles away from you are going to come to your store, right, in a circle, why would you advertise 10 miles away? Right. So that's just kind of demographic makes sense, right?
Right.
You want to advertise in these zip codes. And when I was in the car business for a very short time, they used to find all the people with bad credit within a mile of these car dealerships and send out these ads. $50 get you a car or whatever.
Right.
Credit, bad credit, no credit, doesn't matter. Coming. And these are all these. Some of them are tricks and they feel greasy, and some of them are really good information and it shows how marketing works, right? And I know you've been doing this a long time. Maybe you can just comment on what I just said, or you might even have a story about what I just said, but that information is super vital to teaching people how marketing works.
Well, it's interesting because different types of marketing works different ways. It depends
Right.
upon um, when you're trying to reach people in their buyer journey. So, for example, in the car business, once somebody decides that they have a situation that might lend them to getting an additional car or a new car, then it's about 90 to 120 days typically before they pull the trigger. And so when you advertise on the radio, what you're advertising is that you are a credible place to do business,
Mm-hmm.
right? That when the time comes, you should consider doing business at this Ford dealership or this Toyota dealership. What you're not doing is you're not saying to people, I know that this situation has happened to you, therefore it's time to come in right now and look at our special deals. And when you use radio for that type of message, you're shrinking the available audience down to just the people who've had that situation. So let's pick a situation that might cause somebody to need another car. So I have a situation right now. My 19-year-old son just came back from college, and we don't have a car for him to drive around because his younger brother is now driving the car he drove before he went to college.
Okay.
So we could use another car. So the situation has occurred, right? An additional driver has come home and now we're sharing cars and we don't want to. So that's our situation. Now we have to think about our alternatives. We could get another car, or we could share cars, or we could use Uber when we need to, or we
Mm-hmm.
could buy him a bike, or we could buy him an electric scooter. We have all these choices, right? So once we decide, okay, the way we're going to solve this situation is we're going to get another car. Now the clock is ticking. Now I have to start doing research to find out what kind of car we're going to buy him. And so where am I going to do that research? It's going to be on the internet. It used to be 30 years ago, we would do that research a different way. But now it's all one way. It's all on the internet. And when I get on the internet, what I'm looking for are brands that I know and trust. And the reason I know and trust them is because before the situation happened, they taught me to trust them.
Right.
That's the storytelling medium, TV and radio, that should have been delivering that message of, hey, we're a good place to do business long before my situation. Because now that my situation has happened, there's only 3 months, and they cannot possibly build a relationship with me in 3 months. So I'm going to go only with the people that have developed that relationship with me over the course of a lifetime. So that narrows down the possibilities right away. So now I start doing my research, and what I'm looking for is familiar names that feel good to me. And those familiar names have all advertised to me in the past, right? So now I'm not tuning into the radio or TV hoping to see an ad. I don't do that, right?
Right.
All the information is available to me on the internet. So that's where I do my marketing once I'm in my buyer journey. So if once you understand how it is that people shop and what causes them to get into and out of markets, then you can start to address the correct marketing messages and the correct marketing medium for each of those different kinds of people.
So it's funny. I would go to people and say, hey, either doing sales or marketing, and a lot of companies, especially small companies, when they start running into when it starts getting slow, they cut sales, they cut marketing, do all those things. And they say, well, why should I do it? I don't get anything out of it. I said, no, because you've never got in it for that long haul, right? You understand if you watch the Super Bowl, you're probably going to see an Apple commercial. Do you think they really need to advertise? Well, in their mind, they know that yes, they do, because they're in for the long game.
Right.
And they might have a new widget or something that they're selling. And something that Apple does that I was listening to a Steve Jobs like little commentary thing, and he was saying, Nike never advertises shoes or clothes; they advertise more high performance, right?
Right.
They don't advertise how good the shoes feel. They say if you wear these, look at what Michael Jordan does when he wears these shoes. That's why you need to wear them.
Right.
They celebrate athletics, and I think people a lot of times they just don't get it. It's not something you learn unless you've been in a business like you for a long time. And I know very little about marketing in the whole scheme of things, but I know a lot more than most, people because I've always been on the sales side of things. So I said, look, remember when I went to work for Allstate, they had a sales and marketing person. And I said, those are different jobs, right? I said to the owner, he did not think that was funny, by the way. Kind of took it as a hit, but I said, marketing is very operational. Sales is very, relationship thing. They do work together, but it's not the same job. If you tell me you've got a really good marketing guy and he's good at sales too, that's usually not going to happen. Just because they have they're very different personalities. One's operations, one's sales, in my opinion, anyway. So, yeah, that's interesting. So, I never really thought about what you just said about you've already been sold that product for the last 30 years, right? You already know. We all know, like Toyota, Nissan, all these guys are very dependable.
Right.
So yeah, that was interesting. That was a good way to put that. See how smart you are. I want everybody to read this book because, like I said, even if you're not in sales or marketing, the way you tell a story, you're very effective. And when I gave you my review, it's very from the heart. Is that someone my age could read this book, or someone 20 could read this book, and they're going to get something out of it. That's what the way you wrote this book. That's what was so brilliant about it. Is it's very relatable. You can go, oh yeah, I make that I get that, right? So you told about something, and I don't know if I told you the story about Ken Blanchard. I'm going in a second, but you had gone to this like a seminar, right? And they had these speakers there, and you were gonna go and learn some stuff and come out of there flying, and you were gonna go out and sell. And what you ended up doing is something I would have done, and you started counting people at the place, going, if they all spent $100, this guy's making a killing, right? So you went through that process.
Yeah.
So then you said, I got an idea. Why don't we do this? It's easy. You just invite people to a thing. And I'm not bringing up because it's a failure, because I don't think it was really a failure, but I'm not making fun of you. I'm just saying that it seemed like you could pull this off, right? So you get a venue,
I thought so.
you get Ken Blanchard and you get somebody else. And this was what, is this 20 years ago?
This was 1993. So it's
Okay,
30.
so yeah. So Ken Blanchard, if, for those of you that don't know, probably young people, he's like the godfather of motivational speaking books. He wrote the 1 Minute Manager, right?
Yep.
So I come home from school one day and there's this kid sitting there with my daughter, and there's other daughters around because I have so many. And I'm like, hey, how you doing? And I shake his hand. He says, this is Atticus. They introduced me. And I used to always do this to the girls, the guys that came over to our house. And drive my daughters crazy. So what does your dad do for a living? You can kind of tell about somebody. He says, and he works for my grandpa. I don't really know what he does. And I said, well, what do you mean? What does your grandpa do? He goes, I don't know. He wrote some books and stuff like that. I said, well, what's your grandpa's name? Let's try to draw some information out of this kid, right?
Right.
He goes, Ken Blanchard. And I said, oh my God. Do you even, because Ken Blanchard's son, I think Ken Blanchard too, lives in Rancho Bernardo still.
Yeah,
I met him
he lives in
yeah,
Escondido. Yeah.
yeah, I've met him a couple other times at some events. And I've told him this story. And I said, you really don't, it's like Michael Jordan's daughter says, well, who's that guy? And they go, that's Michael Jordan. He says, no, that's my dad, actually.
Right.
Right. They don't care who Michael Jordan is. They know it's their dad.
Yep.
So here, this kid didn't really know what his grandfather did, but that was just pretty interesting that that I met that kid like that. So you guys hired Ken Blanchard. You hired another guy. I didn't recognize the other guy's name.
Harvey Mackay. Yeah, Harvey Mackay was a big deal in the 90s. He wrote Swim with the Sharks Without Being Eaten Alive.
Oh, wow. So I didn't recognize his name.
Yeah.
And you plan this whole event, you get a venue and you sell a bunch of tickets, but you didn't sell close to what you thought you were going to sell.
Not even close. Maybe we probably sold 15% of the number of tickets that we thought we were going to sell.
So I liked how Dick handled this. So Dick Harlow, you go back, you got it with your tail between your legs.
Yeah, a few days after the seminar was over, I was trying to avoid Dick because it was such a bad episode, and we spent so much money, and radio stations didn't normally do that. And Dick went out on a limb for me and my idea, and I just thought that he was going to be really upset, and I honestly thought I could get fired over it.
Yeah.
And he called me into his office and he started telling me the story about this promotion that went wrong at this radio station that he was managing in a different town. And at the end of it, I said, why are you telling me this story? And he said, because projects fail, Tim. Projects fail all the time.
Yeah.
He says, people learn, right? So even though our project did not succeed, we learned some really valuable lessons, and we know what to do if there's a next time, or maybe we've learned not to do it at all. He says, but you know what? He says it's okay. Go out there and sell some radio advertising.
Well, that's cool. I remember I would always say to people that, and I don't know if this is positively true, but Abraham Lincoln would say he met many people in his life, and what he learned most from people is what not to do. Right.
Right.
Those are those critics we talk about. No statues of critics out there. Anyway, dude, I'm so glad you wrote this book. You did a great job. You really did. I'm not just saying it because you're on my podcast. If I didn't think it was a good book, you wouldn't be on the podcast. I can guarantee you that. And I'm looking forward to us getting together again and chatting about stuff. Anything else you want to say about the book? I mean, it's on Amazon. Like I said, I'll put a link in when I do the advertising, and I'll send you everything so you can share it with your friends. Hopefully we sell some more books for you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I will link back to this podcast on LinkedIn, and I will also put it on my website, which is timjmrohrer.com. That's ROHRER. Mm-hmm. And if you buy the book, if you read the book, I would appreciate you going on to Amazon and giving it a review, because that helps a lot for search results. And other than that, thank you so much for having me on the podcast, Ed. It was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's always good. Like I said, I don't really plan anything out on these podcasts. We just kind of have an organic conversation, and no, you did a great job. So stay on for a second. I'm just going to do an outro here, and then we'll chat for a minute. So
sounds good.
Everybody, thank you for listening. This is the Ed Franklin No Limits podcast. You can get me if you're on YouTube watching this. Please subscribe to my channel. If not, make sure you share it if you see it on social media, so the word gets out there. And I appreciate you listening. You can go to my website, which is kind of under progress construction right now. It's Ed Franklin, no limits, no dot in there, .com. So check it out. And if you guys are looking for anybody to come and do a speaking engagement, it might not be a good speech, but it'll be funny. So anyway, got to advertise something. Anyway, thanks for listening, and I will see all of you very soon. Thank you.